the morning my son boarded a flight to Zurich. His assistant called me before the plane had even leveled off. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, "if I wait any longer, there may be nothing left for you to protect." I was standing at the kitchen counter in Glenview, just north of Chicago, slicing a pear, a small one, bruised on one side. I remember noticing the bruise and almost setting it aside, then deciding, for no reason I could name, not to. It's strange what the mind holds on to when everything else is about to come apart. I'm 74. I live alone in the same house. My husband Theodore and I bought in 1983. I keep my mornings the way some people keep prayers. Warm the kettle before filling it. Fold the dish towel twice, never once. Leave the radio tuned to the classical station, low enough that it feels less like sound and more like weather. That morning, I think it was Ravel, something slow, something that didn't know what was coming. The Boston area code was unfamiliar. I answered only because I thought my son might have switched phones at the airport. "This is Margaret Ashford. Mrs. Ashford, my name is Priya Desai. I'm your son, Julian's executive assistant. I know this is inappropriate, and I may lose my job for making this call. But I need to ask you something before he realizes I've looked." I set the paring knife down. I remember that gesture precisely. My hands already understood before the rest of me did. Looked at what? At the Ashford Heritage Trust subaccount. The name meant nothing to me, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. Julian had always named the accounts like they belonged in a private club. Brightmoor, Ashworth, Ironbrook. Heritage could have been one more line on one more page. What about it? According to the statements you've been receiving, it should hold a little over 2.3 million. I said nothing. It doesn't. I looked out at the maple in the side yard. The leaves were that deep copper colour they get in late October, the kind of red that looks almost wet. I remember thinking how strange it was that the tree hadn't moved at all, even though everything else just had. "How much is in it?" $38,427, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because the number was so small my mind refused it on contact. "You must be mistaken." I hoped I was. So I checked the quarterly archive, then the transfer log, then the fee ledger. "Mrs. Ashford, I don't think your son has been moving your money. I think he's been draining it." I sat down at the kitchen table. The pear was still on the board. The kettle had begun to whistle, and I hadn't noticed. "Send me what you have." "You believe me?" "No." The word came out steady. "But I believe numbers. And if my son has been lying to me for 20 years, then this is the last quiet morning he gets." Some people mistake silence for permission. That sentence came to me later, but I think it was already forming in my chest that morning. I sat for a long time after she hung up. The tea went cold. The light moved across the floor the way it does in October, faster than you expect, and without apology. At 74, you learn not to rush toward conclusions. But something in me already knew. This wasn't a mistake, it was architecture. Theodore died in the fall of 2005. Pancreatic. 6 months between the first scan and the last breath. After the funeral, grief arrived, as paperwork. It always does. Julian stepped in before I knew I needed help. He was 38 then, already with the firm in Boston. Already with that steady voice he used on clients. He drove out to Glenview on a Saturday and sat across from me at this same table with a leather folder and a silver pen. "Let me handle this, Mom. You shouldn't have to carry it." The pen was heavier than mine. He had placed a small post-it note on every line that needed a signature. Little yellow squares, perfectly aligned. At the time, I thought, he has his father's care for detail. Later, I realized that moment mattered more than I understood. He had been a serious boy, too. I remember him at 10, sorting his allowance into envelopes at this same table, one for saving and one for spending, his small face set with concentration. Theodore had smiled and said, "He's going to be careful, that one." I had loved him for his carefulness. I had not yet learned what careful could become. The first document was something he called a limited management authorization. "It just gives me flexibility," he said. Flexibility. Such a small word. Then came the consolidation, then the restructuring, then the rollover into something he called a unified advisory framework. Each conversation happened over tea. Each one sounded reasonable on its own. The quarterly reports were beautiful. Cream paper, embossed headings, little curves moving gently upward. You're conservatively positioned, Mom. Strong, but not exposed. I believed him, not because I understood the numbers. I didn't. I believed him because I trusted the voice explaining them. That's the dangerous thing about trust. It doesn't ask for proof. It replaces it. The morning after Priya's call, I went to the hallway closet. My own records, the ones I had kept before the consolidation, before the simplification. An old accordion file, smelling faintly of cedar, and the lavender sachets I used to tuck in among my linens. Theodore's workshop. He had run a small cabinetry business out of Evanston for 31 years. When he died, we sold the equipment and the remaining lease for a little under $400,000. I remembered the number because I had written it in the margin of a tax document in my own handwriting. Julian had insisted on reinvesting most of it. Idle capital loses value, he said. I found the original sale document. Then the first allocation summary Julian had prepared 6 months later. The numbers didn't match. Not dramatically. Not enough to alarm anyone glancing. But enough if you were looking. That was when something started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't talk myself out of. My phone lit up. A message from Julian. Landed. Long day ahead. Don't worry about anything. I turned the phone face down. For 20 years, I had been the easiest person in his life to reassure. That was about to become his most expensive assumption. At 2:40 that afternoon, Priya called again. We met at a tea house on Dearborn, in the Loop. Green door. A small chalkboard menu in looping handwriting. She was younger than I expected. Late 20s. A face that hadn't yet learned how to hide what it felt. For about a year, I've been handling internal reconciliation, not client-facing reports, the real ones. The ones that show movement before it's cleaned. Cleaned, I repeated. Adjusted for presentation. Of course. Julian had always loved presentation. She slid a thin folder across the table. Rows of dates, transfer IDs, entity names I had never seen. Brightmoor Capital. Ashworth Strategic Partners. Ironbrook Ventures. Beautiful names, empty meanings. Funds move out of your primary holdings into the Heritage subaccount. Within 48 hours, they're redirected through these entities. After that, they disappear into pooled structures. By the time your statement is generated, the numbers look stabilized. Meaning they're invented. Meaning they're curated. But yes, how long? At least 7 years. Possibly longer, under a different framework. 7 years of sitting across from him, nodding at numbers that were no longer mine. Why tell me? Because yesterday he instructed me to prepare a full migration of your remaining liquid assets into a new jurisdiction. Once that happens, tracing anything becomes nearly impossible. Zurich, a fresh chapter. Around us, ordinary life kept going. A woman laughing at her phone. A man reading a paperback. Spoons tapping porcelain. The world doesn't stop when something fundamental breaks. From this moment on, Miss Desai, you will not warn me again. You will document, and when the time comes, you will tell the truth. You're not going to confront him? No. I'm going to understand him. The bank opened at 9. I was there at 8:35. In my charcoal coat and a scarf Theodore had brought me from Quebec in the 90s. Edmund Crawley had handled my accounts long before Julian inserted himself into the structure. He was in his 60s, meticulous, the kind of man who read every line twice and then a third time for good measure. We had known each other since 1994. Margaret, you're early. I prefer it that way. I placed Priya's folder on his desk. I'd like you to look at this. Before you say anything reassuring. I watched his face, not the papers. That tells you more. Professional neutrality. Then a slight tightening at the mouth. A pause that lasted a fraction too long. These entities aren't listed in your declared structure. I'm aware. He looked up. Really looked. How much do you know, Margaret? Enough to understand I've been managed, not advised. That landed. He closed the folder carefully, aligning the edges as if precision could restore order to what he had just seen. If this is accurate, your son has been operating beyond the authority granted in your original mandate. Not beyond. Within what I was persuaded to sign, he knew the difference. We need to secure your position immediately. Revoke all third-party authorizations. That would include your son, especially my son. Margaret, once I initiate this, he will be notified. I know. Outside, the late morning air felt sharper than when I'd walked in. For 20 years, my son had moved my life like pieces, on a board I couldn't see. Now the board was visible. 11 missed calls by the time I got home. All Julian. I set the phone face down. I put water on for tea. I cut a slice of banana bread I'd made on Sunday. Then I read his latest message. Mother, call me. Immediately. No greeting. Instruction. There seems to be an issue with the accounts. I assume this is some kind of administrative error. I'll handle it, of course. Frame it as a mistake. Keep control of the narrative. I typed back. I'm aware of the situation, Julian. The dots appeared, disappeared, appeared. I don't think you fully understand what you're interfering with. There it was. Not concern. Annoyance. For 20 years he had spoken to me in softened language. Now, with the first real barrier between us, the edge was already showing. The phone rang. Mother, what exactly have you done? I've corrected an oversight. Do you have any idea what kind of complications that creates? I imagine the kind that require explanation. A pause. Then the voice he used when he wanted compliance. You're reacting to incomplete information. If someone has been speaking to you, someone has. A beat. Who? That doesn't concern you. His breath shifted on the line. Not panic. Something unsettled. A calculation no longer running clean. You are making a mistake. No, I've been making one for 20 years. I ended the call. A message came a moment later. We need to discuss this in person. I'm booking a flight back. I didn't reply. I opened Priya's folder again, not as a shocked mother this time, as a woman reviewing evidence. By the next afternoon, I was seated in a quiet office on the 8th floor of a sandstone building on LaSalle. Rosalind Bennett didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mid-40s, with the particular stillness of people who deal professionally with lies. She read Priya's documents in silence, occasionally marking a margin with a fountain pen so dark it was almost blue-black. After 10 minutes, she closed the folder. This isn't sloppy. No, it never was. Your son didn't take impulsively. He engineered a system, layered, patient, legally insulated where possible, and where not possible. He relied on your trust. What can be recovered? She looked down at LaSalle through the window, then back. That depends on how far you're willing to go. All the way. Something passed across her face. Not approval, recognition. Then we start by mapping everything. Every transfer, every entity, every authorization you signed. And more importantly, how those authorizations were used. I never approved those entities. You approved something. We need to find the document that allowed him to make it look legitimate. That was the part that sat heavy. Julian had never forced anything. He had guided, reframed, simplified, until my signature became a tool he could reuse. If he has already initiated a jurisdictional shift, Zurich, then part of this may move beyond straightforward recovery. At that point, we stop asking politely. For 20 years, he believed I wouldn't look too closely. He built everything on that assumption. That's a common one. Then let's remove it. For the first time, she smiled. Precisely. From this point forward, you don't discuss details with your son. Let him speculate. People make mistakes when they don't know what you know. One question. The trust Theodore set up for the family. The heritage trust itself. Is it intact? Her expression shifted, just slightly. That, she said carefully, is something we need to examine very closely. That wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the one I had expected. That evening I went into Theodore's study. I hadn't changed it. The walnut desk. The brass lamp with the scratch along its base from the time our grandson Henry rolled a toy truck across it in 2011. The cedar box tucked into the lower drawer, wrapped in a faded blue cloth. Theodore had been a quiet man who believed in physical records. Paper doesn't lie, he used to say. People do. Inside were the original documents, the ones that had existed before Julian simplified everything. Theodore's handwritten notes in the margins, in that precise, slightly slanted script, the Ashford Heritage Trust. Theodore had drafted it in 2003. It was meant to be untouchable, a safeguard, for me, for our daughter Claire, who had passed 4 years before Theodore, and for her daughter Imogen. I laid the original beside the versions Rosalind had flagged. At first glance they looked identical, but I was no longer glancing. Buried in the middle of a paragraph most people would skim, there was a modification. A clean, professional sentence about discretionary advisory authority for liquidity reallocation. Harmless, if you didn't know what had been there before. In that same location, in the original, had been a different sentence. Principal assets shall remain protected from discretionary withdrawal, except under explicitly documented beneficiary consent. Consent. That was the word Theodore had chosen. Clear. Unambiguous. In the revised version, it was gone. I went back to the transfer logs. Not one large withdrawal. A slow bleed. Carefully timed reallocations that fell just within the widened discretion of the revised clause. My husband's safeguard, gone. Not recklessly, elegantly. My phone lit up. 3 messages from Julian. We need to talk before this escalates. You're acting on incomplete information. Don't make this worse than it has to be. He still thought this was about damage control. He didn't yet understand. I ran my fingertip lightly over Theodore's handwriting. I see it now, I said quietly. To no one. There's a difference between taking advantage of someone's trust and dismantling the thing that was never meant to be touched. Julian didn't wait for permission. He flew back the next evening. Just the sound of tires on gravel outside. Then the firm, impatient knock I remembered from when he was a teenager, home after curfew. I finished my tea first. When I opened the door, he was exactly as I expected. Composed. Tailored. That same neutral expression he used in boardrooms. To anyone else, he would have looked calm. To me, he looked adjusted. He stepped inside without waiting. His eyes moved around the hallway, taking inventory. He wasn't here as a son. He was here as a man assessing risk. You've caused quite a disruption. Accounts flagged. Transfers halted. I imagine they have been. He sat across from me in the living room. You've always trusted me. So I'm going to assume this is the result of someone misinforming you. That's not your concern. It is if they're interfering with structured financial operations. There it was again. Language. Always language. I set a few pages on the coffee table between us. Then explained these. He glanced down. Something shifted. His eyes moved faster than they should have. Not reading. Recognizing. How did you get this? That's your second question. This is internal material. Taken out of context. Then give it context. A pause. Fine. Yes, funds were reallocated. Strategically. To optimize returns. From my accounts? Within your structure. My structure. Or the one you created? You authorized every adjustment. There it was, the line he had been waiting to use. Yes, I did. Under information you curated, under explanations you controlled, under documents you revised. The relief that had flickered across his face vanished. Be careful. You're stepping into territory you don't fully understand. No. For the first time, I'm stepping out of it. He paced once across the room and turned back. And for just a moment I would think about this later. Something almost unguarded passed behind his eyes. Not remorse. closer to the look a chess player gets when he realizes the board he thought he'd built has been playing him back. It passed quickly. Whatever you think you've found, we can resolve it quietly. No. Do you understand what making this public would do? I stood. Stepped close enough that he had to look down to meet my eyes. Yes, that's the point. He didn't answer. Because now, finally, he understood. This wasn't something to smooth over. It was coming for him. And for the first time, he wasn't the one steering it. For 2 days, I said nothing publicly. No calls, no accusations. Instead, I sat at the dining room table with Rosalind's notes, Priya's documents, and Theodore's original records, building something more dangerous than anger. A sequence. Every transfer aligned to a date, every date tied to a document, every document traced back to a moment when I had been guided, reassured, or misinformed. By the end of the second day, I had something Julian would recognize immediately. Not suspicion. Structure. That evening I made 3 calls. The first was to Rosalind. It's ready. The second was to Edmund at the bank. Certified summary of all account movements over the past 10 years. Nothing adjusted. The third was the most important. The Ashford Heritage Foundation had been Theodore's quiet legacy. A small endowment, a board of 7, a modest calendar of scholarships. The annual board evening was that Thursday at a hotel on Michigan Avenue. Formal, predictable, including Julian. I'd like to attend, I told the coordinator. I'll be bringing updated financial documents regarding the Heritage Trust. A pause. Understood. Julian had built his life on controlled perception, so I chose the one place where perception mattered most. The night before, he called again. His voice was different, stripped of polish. Don't do this. You'll destroy everything. Not everything. You think they'll take your side based on what? Documents you don't even fully comprehend. I don't need them to take my side, Julian. I need them to see yours. I ended the call before he could reply. The boardroom was arranged, the way Theodore would have wanted, soft lighting, a long table of walnut. Conversations pitched just below the level of intrusion. Julian was already there, speaking to 2 of the trustees. Posture relaxed, voice measured. Anyone watching him would have seen a man entirely in control of his environment. For a moment I simply observed. 20 years of practice, 20 years of performance. Then I walked to the table, heads turned. Recognition came slowly, and then all at once. Julian noticed the change in the room before he saw me. His body stilled mid-sentence. Then he turned. And for the first time since I had known him as a boy, he didn't seem to know what to say. Julian. Mother. The word didn't land the way it used to. I set my leather portfolio on the table and opened it. I apologize for the interruption, I said, addressing the room. Not him. But there are financial matters regarding the Heritage Trust that require clarification. Clarification. The most dangerous word in a room full of people who rely on trust. This isn't the place. It is exactly the place. Given that this foundation is directly tied to the integrity of those funds, I place the documents side by side. Certified account movement. Unadjusted. 10 years. In front of the nearest trustee. Original trust terms, handwritten notes included. Then Priya's logs between them. And the operational layer used to move those funds. The numbers would do the rest. An older trustee named Howard Pemberton adjusted his reading glasses and leaned forward. He didn't speak, he read. Another followed, then another. The room shifted, not loudly, definitively. Julian moved closer, voice lower now. You're misrepresenting technical reallocations. These are standard. Then explain them. He stopped. Because now, he couldn't simplify. Not with documents in front of people who understood exactly what they were looking at. Howard spoke quietly. This clause has been altered. Another voice. And these transfers weren't disclosed in the summaries. And then the one thing Julian had avoided his entire life. Not confrontation. Scrutiny. He looked at me. You should have come to me first. I did. For 20 years. That was when the room went quiet. Howard cleared his throat. Julian, these reallocations, why weren't they disclosed? No answer. A woman I didn't know well, sharper. And this clause. This modification significantly expands discretionary authority. When was it approved? Still nothing. Julian placed his hand on the edge of the table, grounding himself. These are internal structuring decisions. You're looking at fragments. It didn't land. There were too many eyes on the same page. Howard leaned back. I've spent 42 years reviewing financial structures. A pause. This isn't complexity. This is concealment. Julian's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation. So are undisclosed movements of this scale. I noticed Imogen then. My granddaughter, 27, standing slightly apart from the others, hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't looking at the papers. She was looking at her uncle. She had grown up with him at holiday tables. He had taught her to sail at the Michigan house when she was 12. Whatever she was deciding in that moment, it was costing her something. Julian saw her. Just for a second. And in that second, he hesitated. That was all it took. Rosalind's voice came from near the wall. If I may. My name is Rosalind Bennett. I represent Mrs. Ashford in this matter. Julian's eyes snapped toward her. A preliminary trace analysis. Even at this stage, there is sufficient evidence of unauthorized redirection of funds under misrepresented authority. Unauthorized? Julian said. Everything was signed. Signed under materially incomplete disclosure. Silence, clean, final. I stepped forward then, just enough to be seen again. Not as the center, as the origin. For years, I believed I was being protected. I believed my son was preserving what his father built, that he was managing, not taking. I let the word sit. But this isn't management. This is removal. He didn't respond. The room had already decided what it was seeing. I turned slightly. Imogen hadn't moved, but her expression had changed. Not confusion, not shock, understanding, quiet, permanent. And that was the moment I knew. Whatever happened next, whatever could be recovered, whatever would be lost, something more important had already shifted, in the one place Julian had never accounted for, where perception becomes judgment, and judgment doesn't reverse. I gathered my documents without rushing. No one stopped me. Behind me, voices began again, low, different now. Questions, not assumptions. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within the week, the bank's compliance division had issued a formal hold on every account with Julian's fingerprints on it. The brokerage, through a firm in Hartford, placed the custodial accounts under review. Brightmoor, Ashworth, and Ironbrook were each flagged by the IRS, under what Rosalind told me was anything but a routine inquiry. An escrow on a property Julian had quietly placed under a holding entity was frozen pending title review. I didn't celebrate any of it. It was procedural. It wasn't satisfying. It was settled. Not everything could be recovered. Money rarely travels backward willingly. But enough remained within reach to matter. What couldn't be returned was documented. And documented truth follows a person longer than money ever does. Julian tried to reach me one more time. A single message, shorter than the others. We need to resolve this. I read it. Then I deleted it. Some things don't get resolved, they get concluded. The Foundation Board voted within 10 days to remove Julian from any advisory role and to commission an independent review. Howard Pemberton called me personally the morning after the vote. Margaret, you did what needed to be done. I should have looked more carefully years ago. I thanked him and didn't say what I was thinking, that none of us look carefully until we have to. Word moved the way it does in a small philanthropic world, not as gossip, as revision. A charity gala in Lake Forest quietly removed Julian's name from a steering committee. My neighbour Eleanor, who has lived 2 doors down since 1988, stopped me by the mailbox one afternoon and asked gently how I was holding up. She didn't press for details. She just said, If you want company some evening, I'm home. That was the kindest thing anyone said to me in that season. A week after the board meeting, Imogen came by the house. She didn't bring flowers, she didn't bring tears. She brought soup from a place on Clark Street and sat at the same kitchen table where all of this had started. She was quiet for a long time. I keep thinking about last Thanksgiving. He carved the turkey. He asked me about my job. I thought he was being kind. He was, I said, and the other thing was also true. How do you hold both? You don't, all the way. You just stop pretending one of them isn't there. She nodded slowly, not quite ready. Then, I don't want his version of things. I want yours. So I gave it to her. Not softened. The truth in the order it had unfolded. When I finished, she said, "Grandma, I'm sorry you had to be the one who saw it. Someone had to. I'm glad it was you." 2 weeks later, I sat at the dining room table again. In front of me were new documents, reviewed by Rosalind, executed with full clarity. The remaining estate, the assets I had secured, and the portions we managed to recover, all of it had been redirected into a controlled trust, clear, irrevocable. And for the first time in 20 years, defined by me, Imogen sat across from me. "This is for you. Grandma, it's not a gift. It's responsibility." She hesitated. "What about, your uncle made his choices, I've made mine?" She nodded. "Understanding doesn't always come with comfort, but it stays." That evening, after she left, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time. The maple was bare now. The light fell across the yard the way it does in early November. Lower, thinner, more honest. Nothing had disappeared. It had been taken. Quietly, professionally. And I had allowed it. Because I had trusted the wrong person for the right reason. Family. There's a difference between being kind and being blind. I'd spent years confusing the two. Silence, offered long enough, starts to look like permission. I had offered it for a very long time. Not anymore. The kettle had begun to whistle. I turned off the burner, poured the water carefully over the leaves, and sat down at the table. The house was quiet. The light was steady. And for the first time in a long time, so was I.